Space is a graveyard, not just of ships, but of dreams. Most of us out here are chasing scraps, the leftovers of the corporate feasts. Axion Industries, they own half the damn colonies. Their polished ships cut through the void like predators, all gleaming chrome and arrogant thrust. Out here in the Barnard star system, though, they're just another ghost story. We're far enough out that the comm relays get spotty. Data packets arrive late if they arrive at all. It's the kind of place where a man can disappear if he's not careful. Or even if he is. They call this region the Black Drift. Ships go missing. Signals vanish. Some say it's faulty equipment. Others whisper, if they are the type to use such a childish word, of spatial anomalies, pirate gangs, even aliens. Personally, I think it's just the vastness. It's easy to get lost out here. Easy to break down and run out of oxygen. Your frozen corpse drifting for eternity. Undiscovered. A comforting thought, that. At least that's what I used to think, before the Haven one. The Nova Mariner is my home for now. Has been for the last 5 years. The old girl's seen better days, that's for sure. Every shift, I spend most of my time patching leaks, coaxing power from failing converters, and replacing worn-out components with salvaged junk. The deck plating in the engine room is a patchwork of different metals, each with its own distinct texture and a slightly different shade of grey. It's a constant battle against entropy, a losing one maybe, but it keeps me busy. Keeps me from thinking too much. The main corridor's deck is worn smooth in the centre from years of foot traffic. We're one faulty seal away from becoming another statistic. But she's home for now. I know every pipe, every wire, every groan of this ship. I can tell when something's wrong just by the change in the vibrations under my boots. Right now, those vibrations are a little off. It could mean any number of things, most of them bad. My crew, they're a mixed bag. Andrew, our pilot, is a hothead, always itching for a fight or a big score, preferably both. He lost his leg in some military mishap he never talks about, something involving a faulty thruster and a court-martial. The prosthetic he wears is a clunky, outdated model, all exposed pistons and whirring gears. It's constantly breaking down, and he's always complaining about it. But he can fly anything with an engine. Docs are sawbones, though he hasn't held an official medical license in at least a decade, maybe 2. He's a cynical old bastard, is Arthur, always muttering about the depravity of humanity. Got a whole library of pre-collapse medical texts downloaded onto his datapad, though. He's patched us up more times than I can count, usually with salvaged medical equipment and expired pharmaceuticals. I swear half his cures are worse than the ailments. Then there's Clara. She's our muscle. Quiet, intense. Never says much, but she's got a look that could freeze a supernova. She used to work corporate security, protecting Axion's interests back in the core systems. Something happened, something she doesn't talk about. And now she's out here with the rest of us scavengers. And Sparky, he's just a kid, really. 25, maybe. Good with electronics, though. He can rewire a fusion reactor with a paperclip and a piece of chewing gum. They're my crew. Not family, not exactly. We're bound by necessity, by the shared risk, by the thin line between survival and oblivion that we walk every day. I trust them, mostly. And I'll be damned if I let anything happen to them. Not like last time. It still haunts me, that choice I made. Prioritizing lives over profit. It was the right thing to do, but it cost me my career, my reputation. Axion blacklisted me, and now I'm out here scratching out a living on the edge of nowhere. The klaxon jolted me out of my thoughts. A faint ping, almost lost in the background radiation, registered on the long-range scanner. Something was out there, something big, relatively close by in interstellar terms, emitting an energy signature that didn't match any known natural source in the region. It was a weak signal, intermittent, like a dying firefly in a vast, dark field. It could be a malfunctioning beacon, a derelict vessel, or just a glitch in our aging sensors. Most likely it was nothing. "What do you make of it, Gabriel?" Andrew's voice, amplified by the comm system, buzzed in my ear. He was already in the cockpit, his hands hovering over the controls. I was in the engine room, tightening a bolt on a leaky coolant pipe. Could be anything. Probably nothing. Doesn't look like nothing, Andrew countered. Energy signatures fluctuating, but it's definitely there. Big. Could be a derelict, maybe even one of those old colony ships. You know, the ones they sent out before the collapse, packed with cryopods and enough supplies to start a new civilization. He was practically salivating. You could hear the dollar signs clicking behind his eyes. Doc was muttering over the comms about anomalous energy readings, possibly bio-organic in origin. Clara just gave me that look, the one that said, "This is a bad idea," without a single word. Sparky, bless his heart, just sounded nervous. "Captain, are you sure about this? It could be dangerous." We were running low on everything. Food, fuel, medical supplies. Even breathable air was getting recycled a few too many times. Hope, like fuel, is a finite resource out here. "Run a full spectral analysis," I ordered, trying to buy some time. "I want to know what we're dealing with before we make any decisions. And run a diagnostic on the number 3 thruster. It's been acting up." My gut was screaming at me to turn around, to leave whatever was out there alone. But we were desperate. And that energy signature, it was a lure, a siren's call in the silent void. The analysis came back a few minutes later, inconclusive of course. The object was large, metallic, and emitting a strange, fluctuating energy signature that defied easy categorization. But the scan did confirm one thing. It was a ship, and a big one. And the diagnostic, the number 3 thruster, was failing, just as I suspected. Another thing to add to the repair list. Another reminder that we were on borrowed time. "Well, folks, looks like we've got ourselves a mystery. And a potential payday. Plot a course, Andrew. Let's go see what's out there." Andrew grinned, a flash of white teeth in the dim light of the cockpit. "You got it, Cap. Hold on tight. This old girl's about to show you what she can do." The Nova Mariner lurched forward, the failing thruster sputtering and coughing as we accelerated towards the unknown. The energy readings grew stronger as we approached. The object was now clearly visible on the forward view screen, a dark, hulking shape against the backdrop of the nebula. "Magnify," I ordered. The image sharpened, resolving itself into a cylindrical structure, kilometers long, with a rotating central section. It was scarred and pitted, covered in a layer of what looked like ice, reflecting the light of nearby stars in 1,000 points of cold, hard light. It was ancient, that much was clear. And it was silent, broadcasting nothing on any frequency. A ghost ship. "By all that's holy," Sparky breathed, his voice filled with awe and a touch of fear. "Scan for identification," I said. "Got it," Clara said a moment later. "It's the Haven 1, colony ship, launched by Axion over a century ago, part of the Genesis project, presumed lost with all hands. Haven 1. The name sent a shiver down my spine. It was a legend, a cautionary tale whispered in spacer bars and cantinas. A ship full of colonists, frozen in cryosleep, bound for a new world. A ship that vanished without a trace, swallowed by the vastness of space. A monument to Axion's ambition, or their folly. "Prepare to board," I said, my heart pounding in my chest. "Full spectrum scans. I want to know everything about that ship before we set foot inside. Radiation levels, atmospheric composition, structural integrity, everything. And keep an eye out for any signs of life, however unlikely that may be." We suited up in the cramped airlock. Our suits were bulky and cumbersome, designed for salvage work, not combat. They offered some protection against the cold and vacuum of space, but they wouldn't do much against, say, a plasma blast or a determined alien with sharp claws. Not that I was expecting to encounter any of those, of course. Probably. We approached the Haven 1 cautiously, our ship's floodlights cutting through the darkness, illuminating the derelict vessel's scarred hull. It was a behemoth, a relic of a bygone era, its surface covered in a layer of shimmering frost. "There," Clara said. "A docking port, near the aft section. Looks damaged, but it might be our way in." Andrew expertly maneuvered the Nova Mariner closer, extending the ship's mechanical arm. The arm, equipped with a variety of tools, was designed for salvage operations, for tearing apart wrecks and extracting valuable components. Today, it would serve a different purpose, a delicate surgical instrument. "Sensors are picking up faint life signs," Doc reported. "Minimal atmosphere, barely breathable. Temperature is fluctuating, but it's above freezing in most sections." "Let's not get ahead of ourselves, Doc. It could be residual heat, faulty sensors, or something else. We're going in suited, full precautions, no unnecessary risks." It took almost an hour, an eternity in the cold silence of space, but Andrew finally managed to pry open the damaged docking port hatch. It wasn't a clean entry. The hatch was jammed, twisted metal screeching as the mechanical arm forced it open just enough for us to squeeze through, one by one. "Stay close," I ordered, my voice echoing in the confines of our helmets. "Comms check. Sound off." One by one, the crew responded, their voices distorted by the suit's internal speakers. We were in, and the Haven One loomed before us, a dark, silent labyrinth. The airlock door hung open, revealing a corridor beyond. And despite the ship's age and presumed abandonment, it was warmer than it should have been. "Andrew, Clara, secure the engineering section. See if you can get the main power online," I ordered. "Doc, Sparky, you're with me. We're heading for the bridge. I want to see if we can access the ship's logs, find out what happened here." The interior of the Haven One was a labyrinth of narrow corridors and cramped compartments. The walls were lined with pipes and conduits, many of them ruptured or leaking. The deck plating was covered in a thin layer of dust, disturbed only by our footprints. We passed through deserted mess halls, empty crew quarters, and silent laboratories. Everything was coated in a thin layer of grime, and a substance that looked like dried resin in some places, crusty and dark brown. It was a ghost ship, a time capsule of a bygone era. We finally reached the bridge, a large circular chamber with a panoramic view of the surrounding space. The main view screen was cracked, but the auxiliary displays were still functional, flickering with static and distorted images. Doc and Sparky immediately set to work, trying to bypass the security protocols and access the ship's computer systems. I stood by the viewport, staring out at the swirling gases of the nebula, a sense of unease growing within me. "I don't like this, Gabriel," Clara said, her voice low and tense. She was standing beside me, her hand resting on the grip of her modified energy rifle. "It's too quiet, too empty." "I know," I replied, "but we're here now. Let's just get what we came for and get out." "Captain," Sparky called out, "I'm in. Main systems are offline, but I've managed to access the ship's logs. There's a lot of data here, most of it corrupted, but..." "But what?" I asked, turning to face him. "There's one section that's still intact. It's a personal log belonging to the ship's chief medical officer. It details the discovery of something they found on one of the moons they were surveying. Something alive." He turned the monitor so I could see. The text scrolled across the screen, a chilling account of a discovery that would ultimately lead to the Haven One's demise, and a cascade of horrors we were now at ground zero of. "Play it." The screen on the Haven One's bridge flashed, then resolved into an image. A man in a white coat, his eyes wide with fear and fascination, stared back at us. It was a recording, a video log. The chief medical officer, if Sparky's identification was accurate. The man, Dr. Price, began to speak, his voice trembling slightly. "Day 47 of the survey. We found something on the third moon. A new life form, dormant, encased in the ice. Crystalline structures, incredibly complex. It's cold, but it's alive, and it's growing. The ship's lights chose that moment to die, plunging us into absolute darkness. The only illumination came from the monitor, the doctor's terrified face staring out. What the hell was that?" Andrew's voice, distorted by the comm system, broke the silence. "The beginning of their end," I replied. "Sparky, see if you can find out more about what they encountered. Any information they gathered on this thing. Working on it. There's a lot of data here, fragmented, but wait a minute. I'm accessing a research log. Looks like they were on their way to the Tau Ceti system, planet designated as New Eden, standard colonization procedure. They stopped to survey some moons orbiting a gas giant. That's where they found it, on the third moon. A frozen wasteland, covered in some kind of crystalline ice. They brought samples back to the ship for analysis. Big mistake. What did they learn? Clara asked, her voice tense. Not much, but enough, Sparky said. The ice, it wasn't just ice. It was some kind of dormant life form. A parasite, maybe. In its frozen state, it was inert. But when they heated it up, it became active, highly aggressive. It infects other organisms, changes them, makes them into more of itself, from what I can gather from these fragmented notes. So it's some kind of shape-shifting infectious ice. Great, Andrew muttered. Worse, Sparky corrected. It seems to rewrite the host's DNA. It doesn't just change them, it turns them into puppets. Then it starts to replicate, budding more of itself from the infected host. They tried to contain it, but it got out of control. They realized the only way to stop it was to keep it frozen. So, they locked themselves in the cryopods, hoping to outlast it. Or maybe they were hoping someone would find them, rescue them. Either way, they've been floating out here for 100 years, a frozen tomb full of sleeping nightmares. A low, groaning sound echoed through the ship, followed by a series of sharp clangs. "What was that?" Clara asked. "I don't know," I said, scanning the darkness, my helmet lights cutting through the gloom. "But it's getting warmer in here." My suit's internal temperature gauge confirmed it. The temperature inside the ship was rising, slowly but steadily. "The ship," Doc said. "It's diverting power. Away from life support, lights, everything. It's all going to the heating system." "Can we stop it?" I asked. "I don't think so," Sparky replied. "The system's been overridden. It's like something's taken control of the ship. It's locked us out. We're losing life support rapidly, and the primary heating system is going into overdrive. I can still access some data, though. It looks like the ship's AI is being manipulated, maybe by the parasite itself indirectly. It's hard to tell, but the core programming's been altered." "Damn it," I swore. "All right, new plan. Sparky, see if you can isolate the affected systems, slow down the heating process, buy us some time. We need to figure out what to do about those cryopods. We can't just leave them to thaw." I activated the thermal imaging on my suit. It wasn't designed for this, but it might help us see what we were up against in the dark. I toggled the comm system. "Andrew, Clara, do you copy? We've got a situation here." "Copy that, Cap." Andrew's voice came over the comm, tense but steady. "We're in the engineering section near the auxiliary power core, trying to reroute some power, maybe get the lights back on, but it's no use. Something's blocking us, some kind of override." "We hear you," Clara added. "We're holding our position, but the temperature's rising in here too. And we've got company. Something's moving in the vents, small, fast. We're taking shifts, watching it." "Stay put," I ordered. "We're on our way. Doc, you're with me." "Be careful, Gabriel," Clara said. "Whatever's controlling this ship, it wants those things to wake up. And I don't think it's going to let us get in the way." Doc and I moved cautiously through the darkened corridors. The ship was getting warmer. We could hear it now, a faint, rhythmic dripping, like melting ice. It was coming from everywhere. When we reached the engineering section, Andrew and Clara were positioned back-to-back near the auxiliary power core, their weapons trained on the ventilation shafts that crisscrossed the ceiling. "What happened?" I asked. "Something's in there with us," Andrew said. "We heard it moving in the vents, scratching, scraping. Then the power fluctuations started getting worse and something tried to force its way through the grating. We barely fought it off." He gestured with his chin at a nearby vent, the metal grating dented and warped, several long, crystalline scratches marring its surface. "It's the ship," Clara said, her eyes narrowed in the dim light of her helmet lamp. "It's trying to thaw those things out." She held up her energy rifle, its power indicator blinking ominously. "And it's draining our power reserves. My rifle's almost depleted." The thermal imaging on my suit was picking up something. Multiple heat signatures moving through the ventilation shafts. They were small, but they were definitely there, and they were converging on our position. "We need to move," I said. "We need to get back to the bridge, see if Sparky's had any luck isolating the affected systems, and we need to check on the cryopod bay. If the temperature keeps rising, those colonists are going to thaw out and we have no idea what state they'll be in." We reached the cryopod bay, the vast chamber where hundreds of frozen colonists lay in their icy tombs. The temperature in here was higher than anywhere else on the ship, and the dripping was almost deafening. The cryopods were thawing, their transparent lids fogging over with condensation, and from within the fog we could see them. The frozen colonists were beginning to stir, and they were not alone. The crystalline structures were forming again on the exterior of the pods, detaching and moving with a slow, deliberate purpose, drawn to the warmth, to the potential hosts, to us. They were small, no bigger than a man's hand, but they were numerous, and they were getting bigger with every passing second. The ship was not just thawing the colonists, it was birthing an army. The image of those shifting shapes within the cryopods was seared into my mind. It wasn't just the colonists waking up, it was something far worse. The ship, or whatever malevolent intelligence now controlled it, was turning this place into an incubator, and we were caught in the middle of its hatching. The movement within the cryopods intensified. The gentle rocking became a violent tremor. The fogged glass, once obscuring the occupants, now ran with rivulets of condensation, offering a horrifyingly clear view of the colonists within. They were no longer the peaceful sleepers of a century past. Their very skeletal structure was being rearranged from within. Skin that should have been pale and waxy from cryosleep was almost translucent, revealing a network of crystalline veins beneath. Their eyes, once closed in peaceful slumber, were now wide open, but instead of pupils, there were multifaceted, reflective surfaces, like the eyes of some deep-sea creature, catching the light and scattering it in a disorienting, kaleidoscopic display. These were not the faces of rescued colonists. They were the visages of something alien, something born of ice and nightmare. "Sparky, status report." "It's not good, Captain." Sparky responded, strained with panic. "I've tried everything, but I can't isolate the affected systems. The ship's AI is fighting me at every turn. It's focused on one thing, raising the temperature." There was a brief silence, then a string of panicked curses. "The heating system is overloading. It's going to melt everything down." The implications of Sparky's words hit me. We were out of time. There would be no miraculous recovery of the ship's systems, no salvation from the frozen colonists. Our salvage mission had become a desperate scramble for survival. "Forget the ship," I ordered, my voice hard, decisive. "We're getting out of here. Grab whatever supplies you can carry. Food, water, medical kits, anything that will keep us alive. We'll rendezvous at the docking port. And be quick about it. We're on the clock." The crew's acknowledgement was grim, but there was no argument. We all knew this was our only chance. Greed, the initial motivator, was now replaced by the primal instinct to survive. Leaving the cryopod bay felt like escaping the maw of some colossal beast. The dripping had intensified, a constant, maddening drip that echoed the frantic beat of my heart. The temperature was climbing rapidly, and the air was thick with the cloying stench of the thawing ship and the awakening parasites. Our first stop was the ship's infirmary. Doc grabbed pre-filled medkits, still sealed in their original packaging, and stuffed them into a salvaged duffel bag. "Anything that can help with frostbite or extreme temperature exposure," I told him, scanning the shelves. "And anything that looks like it might be effective against those things." I didn't even know what to call the crystalline creatures that were now undoubtedly multiplying throughout the ship. Clara was already in the ship's stores, ripping open crates and boxes, her movements swift and decisive. She prioritized compact, high-calorie food rations and water pouches, tossing them into a large, heavy-duty sack. Andrew, his movements hampered by his prosthetic, was struggling to keep up. "Leave it, Andrew," I said, clapping him on the shoulder. "Just grab what you can carry. We need to be able to move fast." He nodded, and grabbed a few pouches of protein paste and a coil of emergency thermal blankets. Every item we salvaged from the Haven One felt like a small victory, a meager defense against the vast, uncaring void that awaited us. But each item also represented a lost life, a colonist's hope for a future that had been cruelly stolen. Our next stop was the engineering section. We hoped to find spare parts for the Nova Mariner, tools, anything that might improve our chances of making it back to a friendly port. As we approached, a wave of heat washed over us, more intense than anywhere else on the ship. The air shimmered, making it difficult to see. In the center of the engineering section, near the auxiliary power core, a mass of crystalline structures had formed. It wasn't just a cluster of the small, hand-sized creatures we had seen earlier. This was something larger, a grotesque amalgamation of glass and metal, with multiple limbs that ended in wickedly sharp points. It towered over us, at least 10 feet tall, its surface constantly shifting, forming and reforming, dripping with a thick fluid that sizzled as it hit the deck plating. It was like the ship itself was giving birth to something monstrous. With terrifying speed, it shot towards Andrew, its crystalline limbs extending, reaching. He never stood a chance. One of the creature's limbs impaled him through the chest, lifting him off the ground as if he were weightless. Another limb wrapped around his prosthetic leg, the crystalline structure integrating with the metal, twisting, crushing. A third limb, tipped with a razor-sharp point, slashed across his helmet, shattering the visor, exposing his face to the contaminated air. Andrew's agonized cry, cut short by a sickening crunch, echoed through the ship, a sound that will forever be etched in my memory. It was over in seconds. The creature tossed his mangled body aside like a discarded toy, the impact against the bulkhead a dull thud that punctuated the end of a life. There was no time for grief, no time for mourning. We turned and fled, our boots pounding on the deck plating, the image of Andrew's brutal death seared into our minds. The creature, thankfully, didn't immediately pursue. It was more interested in its kill. The retreat was a blur of panicked movement, a desperate scramble through the increasingly hot and humid corridors of the dying ship. The dripping had become a torrent, and in some places, small rivers of meltwater flowed across the deck, reflecting the emergency lights in a grotesque, distorted way. We reached the docking port, breathless and terrified, the image of Andrew's gruesome death still fresh in our minds. The Nova Mariner was still there, a small, fragile bubble of hope against the backdrop of the monstrous Haven One. The docking clamps were still engaged, a physical link to the nightmare we were desperately trying to escape. Sparky was already on board, visible through the cockpit viewport, his face illuminated by the glow of the control panel. He was working the controls, his body language a mixture of desperation and frustration. The docking clamps remained stubbornly locked in place. Clara and Doc reached the airlock of the Nova Mariner first. Doc fumbled with the manual override, his hands shaking, while Clara stood guard, her depleted energy rifle held ready. The airlock door opened, revealing the cramped interior of our own ship. They scrambled inside, their movements clumsy in their bulky suits, disappearing into the Nova Mariner's interior. I was the last one, pausing for a moment at the threshold of the Nova Mariner's airlock, looking back at the Haven One. The docking corridor stretched back into the darkness, leading into the heart of the infected ship. It was no longer a vessel designed for exploration and colonization. It was a womb, a breeding ground for something alien and malevolent. The docking port was our escape route, but it also provided a direct pathway for the creatures to follow. They could be on us at any moment. My gaze swept across the docking clamps, still firmly attached. We were tethered to a corpse, and the parasites were undoubtedly already making their way through the ship. As if on cue, one of the smaller crystalline parasites, no bigger than my forearm, skittered out of the shadows, its multifaceted eyes gleaming in the dim light. It moved with an unsettling, jerky motion, its limbs scraping against the deck plating, heading straight for the open airlock. Clara, without hesitation, raised her depleted energy rifle and slammed the butt of the weapon down on the creature, shattering it into 1,000 pieces. I scrambled inside, hitting the emergency release for the docking clamps. The Nova Mariner lurched violently as we disengaged, the sound of metal grinding against metal echoing through the ship. We were free, but the escape was far from over. As we pulled away from the Haven One, I saw them. Through the viewport, I could see dozens, perhaps hundreds of the crystalline creatures emerging from the docking port, their bodies silhouetted against the flickering lights of the dying ship. They were pouring out into the void, drawn by the heat signature of our ship, a swarm of icy death. We watched helplessly as the Haven One receded into the distance, a dark, silent vessel of waking nightmares, its warmth now a beacon for an icy, spreading doom. It was a Pyrrhic victory. We had escaped with our lives and some meager supplies, but at a terrible cost. We had lost Andrew, and we had left behind a ship full of frozen nightmares, now awakening in the warmth of a dying vessel. A problem I knew with chilling certainty that the greater galaxy would have to face. Another day. I sat alone in the cockpit, staring out at the endless expanse of stars. The initial rush of adrenaline had faded, leaving behind a profound sense of loss and a gnawing fear of the unknown. We had stared into the abyss, and the abyss had stared back. Out here in the black, the dead don't always stay buried. Sometimes they thaw. Sometimes they come looking for you. And sometimes all you can do is run and pray that you can outrun the nightmares that chase you through the void. The Haven One was a warning, a harsh lesson scrawled in blood and ice, revealing the dangers that lurk beyond the familiar glow of charted space. And as we drifted further into the unknown, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were not just fleeing that icy nightmare, but heading towards something even more terrifying. The galaxy, I realized, was a much colder and much more dangerous place than I had ever imagined. And we were alone, adrift in a sea of frozen stars, with the chilling echo of Andrew's last scream forever ringing in our ears.